WCBS-TV News, Newark Revisited, a post-riot assessment of this city in crisis. Here is correspondent Jim Jensen.
Nearly 7 months ago, racial violence erupted in Newark. Violence which took the lives of 26 persons, injured hundreds, and caused damage in the millions of dollars. The immediate cause was the disputed arrest of a taxicab driver. But the underlying causes as old and deep-rooted as the city itself. Squalid housing, chronic unemployment, inadequate schools. A team of WCBS-TV News reporters and correspondents has revisited the city for a second look. Perhaps the most devastating result of the rioting, the smoldering hostility between the Negro community and the police. Has the wound begun to heal? Chet Curtis reports.
If you don't work, you can't eat. Tell it. If you don't work, you don't eat. If you don't work, you can't eat. Hey, hey, hey. You don't work, you can't eat. Now wait a minute. You got to have a job to put shoes on your feet. You got to have a job to buy that family meat. You got to have a job if you want to be healthy and able. You got to have a job if you want to stop that gravy. If you don't work, you can't eat. Oh, you don't work, you can't eat. If you don't work, you can't eat. If you don't work, you can't eat. Maceo, call him. 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 Got to have a job. Got to have a job. Got to get it. Got to have a job. Let's tell it one more time, baby. If you don't work, you can't eat. 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 Look at here. You got to have a job to put the meat on the table. You got to have a job to keep that family able. You got to have a job to put the shoes on your feet. You got to have a job to buy that family meat. If you don't work, you can't eat. If you don't work, you can't eat. If you don't work, you can't eat. You don't work, you don't eat. Call Maceo. Maceo. Call him. 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 Maceo. Hold a little while. Call him. Maceo. Let me hear you scream. I know you listen now. Call him. Maceo. I want you to hear me out now. Maceo. Let's move. If you don't work, you can't eat. Oh, you don't work, you can't eat. If you don't work, you can't eat. Hey, if you don't work, you can't eat. If you don't work, you can't eat. You don't work. Call Maceo. You can't eat. Call Maceo. 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 Call him. Maceo. Call him. Maceo. Maceo now. Oh, you're home. Yeah. Call him.
For many years, Newark seemed to have few problems in the area of police-community relations. It wasn't always a happy accommodation, but until last July, it was free of racial violence, and that was something. But whatever progress this city made to bridge the gap between police and public was wiped out by a midsummer nightmare.
Soon after the riot, the sensitive and complex task of reestablishing lines of communication with the non-white community began with the appointment of a Negro to head the city's Community Relations Bureau. Edward Williams thus became the first of his race to be promoted to the rank of captain on the Newark police force. Williams finds among his biggest frustrations attempting to get through to the young people.
In many instances, it is hard to reach the very people that you need to reach most. These are the young people between 14 and 21 years of age that the regular type programs that we institute don't appeal to them. So we're in the process of trying to set up some other type program that might appeal to the young man in the community.
A bold new concept in youth work aimed directly at the source of Captain Williams' frustration is now underway in Newark's 5th Precinct. It's called the Junior Police Patrol, the brainchild of Harold Liebeskind, chairman of the Clinton Avenue Merchants Association. Approximately 60 boys, 14 through 17 years old, are involved in the project. Some of them have had minor scrapes with the law. Now, through the Junior Police Patrol, they're acquiring a greater respect for police.
Most of you remember
Soon, they'll be out on patrol in their own Clinton Avenue neighborhood. In effect, they'll be an extension of the eyes and ears of the law. Frank Grant, a 38-year-old product of Newark Central Ward, represents another step by the administration to reopen lines of communication. Grant has had a number of confrontations with police in his lifetime. Now, he walks the streets of the Central Ward as Mayor Addonizio's personal representative. He listens to problems and complaints about jobs, housing, police brutality.
I worked at Food Town. They laid me off in a week and a half. And when I went back to get my pay, they had a white fella in my place. I believe the reason was because I was black.
And because Frank Grant has instant access to City Hall, he makes certain the establishment listens. In a month or so, the city will have 3 more men like Frank Grant in the field. Though more than 50% of Newark's population is Negro, only 200 of the 1,400 uniformed members of the police force are non-white. Recruiting efforts have been intensified in recent months, but so far the campaign has been a disappointment. In fact, last year, the department suffered the most alarming loss of personnel in its history. Almost 70 men either resigned or retired early. This in a department which now is almost 200 men under strength. In the post-riot hysteria, which lasted through Halloween, the police department requested funds for new equipment. Some items found lacking last summer have been delivered already. Included were bulletproof vests, new helmets, riot guns and sticks, and a supply of a disabling gas called mace. After reversing itself a few times, the city council scrapped a proposal to establish a canine corps. The dogs became a symbol of law and order to the whites, of brutality and discrimination to the Negroes. And the highly emotional debate over the issue seriously delayed the painstaking progress made in the area of community relations since the riot.
There have been no brilliant successes to report in the area of police community relations, but perhaps after the searing experience of last July, 6 months, even several years, just isn't enough time. This is Chet Curtis, WCBS-TV News.
Newark Revisited will continue in a moment.
Palm trees. Tropical birds. Tropical birds.
Bathing beauties.
Bathing beauties. Jockeys. Jockeys. Beach chairs. Beach chairs. Florida stuffed shrimp.
We at National Airlines have taken a lot of the good things of Florida and put them in our planes. What we've done is kind of turn Florida into an airline. So from now on, when you fly National, you fly Florida.
Hey, Speedy! You forgot something.
National. The ones who turn Florida into an airline.
Is this any way to run an airline? You bet it is.
A man's home is his castle, as the saying goes, but for the Newark Negro in the past, this has all too often been a couple of dilapidated rooms, cold water, and a kerosene stove. As a matter of fact, Newark has the highest percentage of substandard housing in the United States. Is a solution in sight? Harry Arouh reports.
One of the major contributing factors for the riots which exploded here in Newark 6 months ago was the pitiful lack of adequate housing for the people in the core area of the city. Little, if anything, has been done since that time to alleviate this explosive condition. Now, the housing problem in Newark is so complex that it's difficult to find a convenient spot to place the blame.
Newark seems to have the makings for a solution to the problem. It's in the Federal Model Cities program. It has one of the largest urban renewal programs in the country, and there are half a dozen housing projects either in the works now or under construction, which, if carried through to completion, could mean an addition of about 1,000 new units for ghetto residents trapped in the rundown core of the city. Yet, despite these hopeful conditions, Newark's housing situation remains seriously lacking. The trouble lies in the core of the city, where 84% of the population is Negro. The houses in this region are mostly of frame construction, and many of them are over a century old, too dilapidated to be renovated. And yet the residents who are forced to live in these buildings, almost exclusively Negroes, have to pay higher rents than whites who live in comparable accommodations, even though Negroes earn less money and have larger families. Mayor Addonizio recognizes the problem, but he points out that the city's efforts to get new housing have been blocked by the profit-motivated policy of the Federal Housing Authority, which he says has been reluctant to approve proposed housing projects. The mayor admits that the FHA has shown a tendency in recent months to liberalize this policy, but this has not developed yet into a significant increase in housing construction. Dr. George Sternlieb, research director at Rutgers University in Newark, has studied the problem for 5 years and has completed a number of reports, including one entitled Social Needs and Social Resources. This was completed just as the riots erupted last summer.
We have one standard of life. Television has created that for us. It's homogenized standards. And the variance between the way people live, the kinds of houses they live in, and the kind of life they see on TV or hear about on the radio, see in the movies, is just too high. This variance is a continual stimulus, continual irritant, and creates anti-social activity.
You paint a very grim picture. What is going to happen in the area of housing in Newark in the future?
We have a lot of experience with forces that are held down. They tend to explode, and that's what's going to happen. There's nothing that is new, that has changed since the last riot.
Dr. Sternlieb writes, the failure to understand the urgency in the core areas, the delay in implementing programs while the question of who gets the job was being debated, set the scene for the explosion. And he goes on to say, the basic problems of the city remain. Armed force cannot cope with them. There doesn't seem to be anything practical which can cope with them before next summer. And that's the most fearsome part of the whole thing. Harry Arouh, WCBS-TV News.
For the Newark youngster, the time not spent at home should, for the most part, be spent in school. But here again, the city has been delinquent. If there is to be a brighter future for Newark, then its young must be afforded a good education. Jeanne Parr reports.
This is the Camden Street School in the heart of Newark's riot area of last summer. It probably represents, more than any other school, all the Negro complaints about the city's schools. It's too old, too small, too run down, and too overcrowded. 3 out of 4 school children in Newark are Negroes, many of them deprived of normal cultural and economic opportunities. There's a high rate of scholastic failure. 80% of the 6th graders, for instance, are more than a year behind in reading. There were 11,000 cases of truancy last year, and the dropout rate is high. On top of this, there is a serious teacher shortage that has increased since last summer's riots, the rate of resignations having doubled. Second-grade teacher Peter Paglia, who is president of Newark's Teachers Association, spoke of the prevailing mood of the teachers.
Teachers in Newark are disgusted. They're just fed up and they want to leave. The truth of the matter is that 300 teachers have left since September. And if something isn't done, it's going to get worse. Now, we conducted a survey, the Newark Teachers Association, and as a result of that survey, we know that at least 1,000 teachers are planning on leaving the Newark school system. And if something isn't done, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to 2,000 or more.
George Burke, a former 8th-grade teacher in Newark, resigned last fall. We found him working for an insurance company in East Orange, New Jersey, where he spoke of the main reason for his resignation.
When you are standing in a hallway and you see a child go at a teacher with a pipe, and nothing is done about it, and also the next day this child is caught with a knife and nothing is done about it, and there is a meeting and a conference on this child where this child has a police record, has been told by the school psychologist and the school psychiatrist that this child does not belong in a classroom situation to be put into a special school, and there's no room for a child. These are conditions that you cannot teach under. These are conditions that no dedication will cover up and hide. It's impossible. I couldn't stand there and see this go on. I couldn't fight it. I had to leave.
The classrooms are inadequate and overcrowded. So overcrowded that many children have to be bused out of the area to other schools, although split sessions have been cut starting this February by 75%. Presently, there is a shortage of 10,000 classroom seats, the equivalent of 10 new schools. And since last summer, not one new school building has been completed. Superintendent of Schools Franklin Titus summed up the situation simply. "We are broke," he said, and the city has run out of its ability to tax. One pilot program begun before the riots points the way for Newark schools. It's a partnership between the Board of Education and Rutgers University in the Central Ward District. A storefront operation to get more parents involved in the schools and to design a better curriculum. This, along with a special experimental school, which has just been designated, and follow-through programs which have started in 3 schools, shows that Newark is desperately trying, that a sense of urgency is evident at the Board of Education. Here in Newark, between the outrage and the optimism, there is one cold, hard fact that stands out. If Newark has a future, it depends largely upon what is done or not done for the children in these schools. This is Jeanne Parr, WCBS-TV News.
In the area of health and medical services, perhaps statistics paint the dismal picture best. If the death rate in Newark were applied nationwide, there would be 600,000 additional Americans dying per year across the nation. Science editor Earl Ubell reports on what's being done.
All around me is an ocean of disease. All around me is evidence that racial intolerance brings more than humiliation and discomfort. It brings death.
This is High Street, an avenue once full of physicians. Here once stood a doctor's house. But 200 doctors have gone to the suburbs in 10 years. Men like Dr. William Haley, an obstetrician, have stayed to work at Newark City Hospital, the main bulwark against disease in the slums. With so few slum neighborhood doctors, the people have only the clinics. Upstairs, 120 interns and residents, the hospital's full quota, provide high-quality medicine. But the hospital lacks nurses. It needs more money that Newark can't provide. And it won't be until 1970 that New Jersey state Medicaid will provide large-scale health funds. The big current hope is the New Jersey School of Medicine, now in Jersey City and scheduled to move here next to the hospital this year. Many count on it to raise standards of care inside and outside the hospital. The school already supervises the interns and residents. This iMobile is a forerunner of other slum-based mobile clinics planned by school and hospital. The City Health Department clinics also share the burden of care to the poor. Since the riot, the department has a new program of disease testing in the slums.
The federal anti-venereal disease program has stepped up. New Jersey has just opened an anti-narcotics bureau to deal with an estimated 6,000 addicts in Newark. Dr. Aaron H. Haskin, Chief Health Officer, says he needs 50% more than his current $2.5 million budget for a serious program to reduce disease.
That's just to begin with. For instance, the development of medical health centers, which is being established in association with the Model Cities program. When that gets going, there will be a tremendous increase in public health services to the community.
Well, how much money would you need for that total program?
That total program may ultimately reach as much as $5 to $6 million.
In other words, you need 3 times as much as you're getting now for a full-scale health services program in Newark.
That's correct.
Part of the burden, too, falls on 5 private voluntary hospitals like St. Michael's. The 5 have just raised $12 million for improvements. But these institutions, taking care of paying patients primarily, are able to care for only a small proportion of the slum poor. In the slums, there has been a start toward health, but so far the effort has not been enough. Perhaps one day it will be. Earl Ubell, WCBS-TV News.
Newark Revisited will continue in a moment.
Wouldn't it be nice for once if your body and your mind started their vacations at the same time? If you could leave everything behind you, before you got to where you were going. Well, we can help. Because we at National Airlines have done something that'll make your flying a lot less like traveling. And a lot more like, well, like vacationing. Just to get you all relaxed. We've kind of turned Florida into an airline. What it's exactly like is kind of hard for us to tell you about. You see, it's part physical, part mental. But either way, it's kind of nice. National. The ones who turned Florida into an airline.
Is this any way to run an airline? You bet it is.
When we talk about a remedy for the material needs of Newark slums, we arrive at one word: money. Money for schools, money for housing, money for hospitals, and to create jobs. Money from Washington, from the state, and hopefully in the form of private investment. For a report on Newark's economics, financial correspondent John Quirt.
Last summer, Newark's principal underlying problem was economic. It still is. Unemployment, the welfare burden, and most other problem areas could be assuaged, though not entirely solved, with more state, local, or federal funds.
But state and federal funds remain almost as scarce as before the riot, and the city's ability to raise revenue through property taxes is limited by the fact that this and other large tracts of land near downtown remain off the tax rolls. An even more visible sign of economic decay a half year later, removal or going out of business signs and boarded up store windows along Springfield Avenue, where most merchants are fearful of what may happen next summer.
A majority say they're leaving, moving to downtown Newark or to other cities. One of them, Gil Bushburg, former president of the local Merchants Association, explains why he and other store owners are giving up on the avenue.
Well, number one, there has been a rash of backdoor burglaries going on since the riots. During the riots, at least we knew what we had to cope with. The people were trying to come in the front ways. Since then, there's been a tremendous amount of backdoor robberies, burglaries.
What about insurance? Are the companies playing fair?
Well, as you know, we had a 90-day moratorium after the riots, which has lapsed. And now the problems of cancellations have come about. Most people are not able to renew and have left the area. And those of us who were able to, as myself, we had to get policies at exorbitant rates through companies like Lloyd's of London.
Bushburg's explanation for the exodus along Springfield Avenue is not shared by Henry Connor of the Chamber of Commerce.
Now, these stores, and to a man like Mr. Bushburg, this is a tragic situation, and he's not interested in overall trends. He's interested in what happened to him. But his business and the other businesses on Springfield Avenue are not a major factor in the Newark economy.
Business statistics mostly bear out Connor's contention that Newark itself is not going the way of Springfield Avenue. Retail sales haven't slumped since the riot, and one new department store has opened downtown. Construction activity has not fallen off. Unemployment remains well above the national average, but there's been a slight improvement in the jobless situation among Negroes, partly due to efforts by businessmen to create jobs for what had been the unemployable. Yet any real dent in the city's unemployment problem will almost certainly have to be made here, in this marshland, site of an industrial park near Port Newark. On this city map, it's the brown area on the right. Federal development money came through a few months ago. Henry Connor expects 8 companies to start building plants or warehouses here next summer. If that happens, the 8 could provide about 2,500 new jobs, and in addition, a psychological lift. That clearly would help. For Newark's economy is down but not out, hurting but not beyond repair. It's no worse off today than before the riot, but it needs money, jobs, and a vote of confidence from incoming businessmen before it can show any real improvement. John Quirt, WCBS-TV News.
The man who must ultimately answer for the success or failure of any large city is the mayor. It is he who has the overall control, whose control will ultimately be judged by the voters. For a look at Newark's politics, legislative correspondent Jerome Wilson.
Newark is one more test of the political direction of the modern American city. This is marked by the waning power of the older immigrant groups, Italians and Irish, and the growth of the Negro political power in the central core.
The most obvious target for many Negro politicians, particularly since the riot, is Newark Mayor Hugh Addonizio. The mayor is realistic enough to admit that if he runs again in 1970, then on the surface at least, the race will boil down to a question of black against white. But of course there will be other issues, all relating really to one question. How well do the people, black and white, think Addonizio has done his job, particularly since the summer of 1967?
Well, I might point out that we've just completed 1,000 units of public housing. There is another 1,000 units under construction. We certainly think that this is going to be tremendously helpful. We finally have the insurance companies of America involved in a housing program. Newark was the first city to benefit under that program, and we have a building going up presently under that insurance program, and Newark certainly will benefit from that. We also have other housing that has been in the process of construction just prior to the riots or after them. And we feel that this year of 1968 that Newark is going to see its greatest housing boom in its history. Newark is 300 years old. We have tremendous problems all along the lines that you have suggested. And I agree with you that certainly Newark cannot cope with these problems within its own financial ability. However, we have been constantly pleading with state and federal governments to send money in here to do the kind of job that's necessary. I don't know of anything that's been done either on a state or federal level yet that has really been directed towards correcting the conditions that brought that about.
But the obvious political question must be raised about the mayor and the city's Negro community. What does the mayor think the Negro community wants in Newark?
Well, I think that they're all mindful of the fact of the possibilities of their own political strength and the opportunity perhaps to elect a Negro mayor in the foreseeable future. I think as a result of this, this has created certain problems in our community. And I think basically they're just seeking that which every other ethnic group has ever sought, and that is certainly a base from which they can operate and bring some of the gains to their own people.
Although Addonizio says he is ready to run again in 1970, since the disturbances he has privately made it known that he would like to get out. He recently took a sounding on how he would do in a race for governor in 1969. Meanwhile, Negro voter registrations in Newark climb. City engineer Kenneth Gibson, who ran third in the race for mayor in 1966, has announced his intentions to run again in 1970.
The fact of the matter is, in 1966, we ran a very short campaign with no money and very little organization. The fact of the matter is that historically now, we have Cleveland, for instance, where Carl Stokes was elected. We have Gary, Indiana, where Hatcher was elected mayor, which gives a different kind of a picture for a municipal election in Newark. People will understand that you can run a decent campaign, not a racist campaign.
The race in 1970 might pit one Negro candidate against another, with Addonizio benignly looking on from the sidelines. If Addonizio does not run, he would nonetheless have a candidate. Most likely that candidate would be Councilman-at-Large Calvin West, who, with the mayor's backing, became the first Negro to win a citywide. That was in 1966, and West has stayed loyal to the mayor in spite of blandishments from Negro leaders to come over to their camp.
Still, Newark's mayoral campaign in 1970 is a long ways away. Besides, between then and now is the race for New Jersey governor in 1969. Jerome Wilson, WCBS-TV News.
No one but the most naive could expect a city with the overwhelmingly complex problems of Newark to show great gains in the space of only a few months. Housing, hospitals, and schools take years to develop, and so do attitudes. And it is the latter, attitudes, which will play such an important part if our great urban centers are to be tranquil. The people in power have to want to help. Decades of neglect cannot be overcome overnight. And yet that is only half the fact. It has been decades of neglect combined with broken promises. And yet there still exists in the slums of Newark the anticipation of a better life. And the time has come when this city can ill afford neglect or broken promises. This is Jim Jensen, WCBS-TV News. Good night.
From WCBS-TV News, this has been a special report. Newark Revisited. This broadcast was produced under the supervision and control of WCBS-TV News.